with me because I hate this microphone, but I've been screwed over by not having any pockets. So, yes, I'm Laura Helsby, I'm from the University of York, and this is my talk on gaming habits in a low mood population, which is specifically an interview study I did with people with persistent low mood about what they like to play and why they like to play it. So a little bit about me. My background is primarily in psychology. This is me in Stardew Valley. This is how I look on my poster. So if you see this on a poster, it's mine. And the main reason I kind of fell into this topic is because I started focusing on mental health and gaming. And when it came to low mood and depression, all I could find was stuff about addiction, which is very important. But no one was kind of asking anything beyond depressed people are more likely to be addicted, and that was kind of the end of the story. Obviously there's been a pandemic in the meantime, so things have gotten a little bit better. There's a whole host of cognitive benefits that might be particularly useful to a depressed population. And basically no one had asked, and I wanted to because I thought it was interesting. So these were kind of the main research questions I started with. So what kind of games do people with persistent low mood play? When and why do they play them? And how do they feel about their gameplay? The when won't really come up again in this talk because so far there's not been anything particularly standout or interesting about it, but the other things will crop up to various degrees. So my methods. My recruitment, the recruitment criteria was 18 plus. I use this term persistent low mood, and the reason I use this rather than depression is because when I started using the term depression, there was a lot of people saying they didn't have a diagnosis and they weren't sure if they qualified, and also people saying that they weren't sure if they were depressed enough. That was a frequently common comment. So people seem to be a lot more comfortable identifying with this term, and a lot of people would often have like a depression anyway or identify with that. And I had to have an active interest in video games. So the data collection, I had a semi-structured interview with 10 questions. I interviewed 20 participants, and there are 18 in the final sample purely because the audio quality just wasn't good enough for an accurate transcription, unfortunately. And I used reflexive thematic analysis. So I did an interesting thing with demographics. The only demographic I asked for was age, and I let participants introduce themselves apart from that. So anything they included that they thought was relevant. So of the 18, 13 of them reported occupation, 8 were students of some kind, and that includes all the way from undergraduate to like PhD. 3 were in game development, and 2 just worked in an education field not attached to a university. So the mean age of the sample was 25.94, and the range was 18 to 39. In terms of types of games, almost every single type of game was mentioned at some point, but these were the main ones that kind of cropped up again and again. So there were competitive FPS games, simulation, strategy, RPGs, and story-focused games. So what did I find? There were kind of 5 main themes here. They were finding consolation in predictable experiences, finding a focus in engaging games, gaining a sense of success, valuing games and what they can offer, and exacerbating the negative aspects of gaming. So I'm just going to go through each of these, give you some example quotes, and kind of just unpack them a bit more. So on the right, you'll see some games that kind of came up in association with these themes. That will be the consistent pattern throughout. So finding consolation in predictable experiences. So this describes a desire for low-effort games that don't demand much in terms of energy or engagement. So this particular pattern kind of cropped up when low mood was really low, so periods of like extreme depression. And the key kind of themes about this were people wanted predictability from their gameplay, they wanted consistent feedback from the game in that they would consistently build things or grow things, and there was kind of like a neutral emotional response to this. So this participant said, I would definitely say that the lower my mood, the more basic the game I play, the more repetitive. So I found that games like Stardew Valley, Animal Crossing, the games where I can literally stop thinking, I tend to play those most when I'm at a really low mood, and I tend to play them in a way that's quite autopilot. So I think this kind of highlights quite well the key kind of feelings behind this theme. And then the next one, this one's interesting because this talks about Diablo, which you would typically think of as quite a high engagement game, but this goes to show that the type of game is less important than the kind of attitudes behind that. So in Diablo, you can just kind of put yourself in a dungeon over and over again and see if you get anything better. This person talks about ignoring the storylines and just doing the same events over and over again just to kind of occupy their time. So the next theme is finding a focus in engaging games, and this describes the desire for immersive games which would hold attention. So the key difference between this and the first theme seems to be energy levels, and there's also an element of excitement there. So with this, people would talk about mostly story-driven games or strategy games, and the idea is that they wanted a game that they could fully immerse themselves in, that would offer them a lot of content and they could get really invested into. So there was often a strong emotional response attached to this, and often it would continue beyond the game itself. So people would obsessively read about lore on Wikipedia pages, or strategize with teammates, strategize on their own, that kind of thing. So this quote, "So I really like Night in the Woods. It's a very engaging game. It's focused on plot, characters, story. It's not particularly extravagant control-wise or game mechanics-wise, but the story, the progression, finding out what happens, that's the sort of thing that's compelling and gripping." And then this quote, again, explicitly links it back to the low mood. "I do find that if I'm quite stressed or at a low point, I tend to become way more obsessive. So I will try and find out everything I possibly can, all about the mechanics of the game, or read all the lore, and just become quite obsessed with it in a way that I wouldn't normally if I wasn't experiencing a low mood at the time." So again, this is a participant explicitly linking this to something that gets worse with low mood, and that will crop up again in a theme in a bit. So the third theme is gaining a sense of success. In a simple nutshell, that's enjoyment from achievement. And this isn't unique to a low mood population, as I'm sure we all know, but it's potentially more significant to a low mood population, and this needs more unpacking, which is why there's the question mark. So this includes competitive games for self-improvement, this idea of strategy games and the joy of executing a successful strategy in those games and feeling smart, and this idea of consistent progress, and also, interestingly, social success. So I've got a quote to illustrate that in a minute. So when you're going through a bout of depression, it's very easy to feel like you're not accomplishing anything. So I think personally, the reason I think these games resonate with me is because they give you that sense of accomplishment. That was specifically, I believe, in regards to kind of simulation games in particular. And then this quote is the one about social success, and I think this is super interesting. So this person was talking specifically about CSGO and being part of a CSGO team. And they said, "I kind of feel like I'm part of some form of lingo that people might not know. And I guess maybe I interpret the room wrong, but I kind of feel like they're not jealous, they don't know what I'm talking about, but they might be a bit interested. And I kind of feel a bit like quirky, I guess. Gives me a bit of an identity that I might not have otherwise." And this is quite interesting. There was quite a lot of participants who talked about being bullied or having difficult teenage years, and that games would give them this sense of social success that they hadn't gotten earlier on. So this is quite a broad theme. This is valuing games and what they can offer. And this describes a generally positive attitude towards games that all of my participants exhibited. So there's kind of three main parts to that. Games offer a unique way for social interaction, and that was very much appreciated. Again, particularly in low mood, social gaming helped a lot. Games offer a safe way to experiment and discover identity. And also, again, relevant to low mood, games can be used to flatten and regulate low moods. So even if games didn't necessarily make them feel happy, it could boost a negative mood up to a more neutral mood. So this one's about the kind of social aspect games can offer. So about solving a problem together with someone, and sometimes the other person is the problem. And that you can learn to know how a person thinks that way, and there's a kind of intimacy within that. And I think that most people would potentially agree that apart from games, there's very few things where you kind of get that kind of interaction with someone. And then this is the interesting one about identity. So for some background, this participant is bisexual. They were male and they were currently married to a woman. And they mentioned how they grew up in a very homophobic area, so they felt like they never really got to explore their bisexuality. And through a game, this was specifically Dragon Age Inquisitions, if you're interested, they got to date a character of the same gender as them and experience and understand their sexuality more. And I think that that's a really cool thing that, again, games can do that you can't really get from anything else. And then this refers to like the emotional flattening. So I think it definitely helps me switch off my brain, which I can have problems with, especially with the low mood. If I get myself distracted into a game, that can kind of give me some relief from that long enough to get my head back on straight. And again, this cropped up a lot with competitive games and people using competitive games as a way to learn how to handle their emotions, and I think that was quite interesting. And then finally, on the more negative side, exacerbating the negative aspects of gaming. So when in a low mood, gaming experiences tended to be more negative or less beneficial. So all those kind of negative emotions you might expect, so guilt, emotional reactions, obsessive play, they all cropped up a lot more and were described as a lot more, I guess, damaging to the participant when they're in a low mood. So I think when I'm doing less well than I am, I can find myself almost not playing for fun. I'm just playing because it's what I do. I'm kind of going through the motions of being me, but I'm not often deriving in a huge amount of enjoyment from the game. I think you can see how this kind of links to the sort of passive play that I mentioned previously. And then let's say I'm binging a game or something because I'm in a low mood. I will then feel like I've got nothing else done, and I'll feel super low because that's a guilt and it's wasted time. And guilt is something that cropped up quite a lot and was one of the key things that was exacerbated by low mood. So, the discussion. In summary, distraction is always appealing, but it can take different forms. And as mentioned, energy levels seem to play an important part with that, whether you have the energy to throw yourself into those immersive games or not. Low mood might mitigate some of the positive effects of gaming, and that needs further unpacking. But it's important to remember that games were ultimately reported as very valuable by by every single participant, and that doesn't mean that basically you shouldn't just focus on the negatives. Also, game genres aren't real. Every single participant who mentioned RPGs had a different definition, and that's why I say game types and not genres. So some points of consideration. Obviously, the interviews require a certain level of reflection, and reflection is a skill that people can have to different levels. So that could be a potential limitation or something to consider when looking at the results, is how well people can actually reflect on their own abilities. Most of the sample involved in education and gaming, which again could have some interactions potentially also with reflection. And I think one of the main things, how low is low? Because I'm looking at low mood, people who are in particularly low mood are unlikely to take part in the study because they don't have the energy or ability and they're not likely to see it. So that's also important to remember. So future directions. So how unique to low mood are these findings? There's actually two interesting studies I found recently, which are interviews with PTSD people and people with schizophrenia, asking about their gameplay. And with PTSD, there's elements of low mood, and if you look at the low mood, there's a lot of stuff that kind of is similar to what I found, but there's also key differences that have come from the PTSD. Do they reflect feelings arising from the moment? So again, as I mentioned, the interview study is like a reflection exercise. It's not necessarily talking about how they're feeling currently. I'm actually tackling this at the moment. I'm running a diary study, trying to look at emotions more in the moment of play. And then, how important is achievement versus feedback? Is there a difference? Does it matter? We don't know. So yeah, that's the talk. I'm looking for a knowledge exchange, work placement. My poster is the Stardew Valley one, if you want to find me. Yeah, that's it.